Andrea, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. Apparently, a continuing series. So I guess you're down to me,
Well, actually, no, we've got a few more. So
Andrea. I'm just kidding. It's been obviously a very busy time with COVID. Our part-time job as legislators has always been full-time, and in this interim, again, it's been very busy. Being the chairman of education, work with COVID, how to get our schools back open with the connectivity issues that we've been dealing with. So it certainly has been a very challenging time, and I think this next session is going to be challenging as well. COVID has changed a lot of things. I think we're going to learn some things. In fact, I'll be interested to hear from your members and talk about transportation. Obviously, we've seen traffic reduced with people working from home. Uh, Obviously, I don't think everyone's going to continue working from home, but I think you will see a significant difference in how that affects transportation. My personal thing is it may slow down the growth for a little bit, and then once the people continue moving to Texas, which they are doing in droves. In fact, I think COVID is accelerating that as well. You just saw where HP is moving to Texas without any incentives at all. They just literally came to us and said, "We're coming. We don't want anything. We just want to get out of where we are." There's some real issues in some other states that are driving even more companies to move towards Texas. So I think we're primed and ready to go for an incredible economic comeback. We have a great playbook for how to handle these budget sessions, which we're going to have. When I call it a budget session, is when our revenues are down and the expenses, as you know, don't usually go down. We have to uh, make them fit with what we have. We have a balanced budget requirement in the state of Texas, so we're going to have less dollars. The good news is, according to the comptroller, back in July when he gave us some numbers, it looked worse than it looks now. It's still worse than it was in the prior budget. He was talking about $4.6 billion shortfall for the budget that we're in. So that helps. We've also gotten some other good news. We still have some unknowns. What's going to happen with the federal government? Are they going to do another CARES type program, which would help with some of the expenses? And also, what's the economy going to be doing between now and when the comptroller gives us that revenue estimate at the beginning of session? So the more positive signs we can see, and I think the vaccine is going to be a positive sign for our economy. People realize that vaccine is rolling out, things will start coming back more quickly. We'll get more people with confidence to get out and participate in commerce. I'm encouraged by that, but this session, I talk about the things we have to get done. Obviously, a budget is one of those, and this is going to be one of those challenging sessions. This will be my third one. I first came in in '03, where we faced a $10 billion budget shortfall. I was there in 11, caused by the 2008 economic downturn, when we had a $17 billion shortfall. And we have a great playbook on how to handle those. We're going to use that same playbook again. We don't increase taxes on our citizens and our businesses when they're already struggling to survive. But we do go back and look at how we spend every dollar, make sure we spend every dollar as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And both times we've done that, we played that play out of the playbook. We come back the next session with budget surpluses. And we're going to follow that same playbook again this time. Our structure was sound before COVID, and I think we're going to come back even bigger and better with some of the lessons we've learned and just the fact that we're going to have more people moving here. And we're ready for a good session and a good future for Texas. We worked a lot on education last session with the passage of House Bill 3, which is a major school finance as well as school reforms. Education reforms primarily targeted towards our lower income students. Uh, Many people don't realize that today's student body may look different than the student body that you went to school with. It's now 60% of our students qualify for a free and reduced lunch. That means they're low income. And that demographic is not only the largest demographic at 60%, it's also the fastest growing. And the really unfortunate news is historically that's been our least educated. So that's why you saw that mammoth effort taken on last session to make sure we reach those kids, because you don't have to look too far down the road. If that's already 6% and growing, and they weren't going to get, if they didn't get the education they need and we want them to have, we were not going to have the same state that we have today. So our primary goal, even during this budget session, is to make sure we continue with the commitments that were made during House Bill 3. That need is still there. In fact, in some cases, it's going to be worse. That we've always had the closing the gaps between our lower income students and everyone else, just because some of the issues social. But now we've got a connectivity issue. And so some of those same kids are now having another divide caused by the connectivity problems or lack thereof. So we've been working very hard on that. One of the benefits of COVID is, we've been pushing technology into the classrooms and doing more, having more access to broadband. Some of the things we had done leading up to this, like our E-rate program, we now have 98% of all of our classrooms, I'm sorry, the schools, campuses in Texas, 98% plus have broadband access. Obviously, the last 2% or so, 1.5% is probably the most difficult, but we've made great strides in that. We've also now are going to have every one of our students with one-to-one devices. So every student will have a device, and that's unheard of. And then we've been working towards that. I think technology is a great innovation for education. It's a great enhancement. We didn't plan on it being the only source of education for many of our students, but even in the future, that's going to be a great educational enhancement for our regular face-to-face students. And there's some students who've actually done better virtual. And we want to make sure those kids have those opportunities in the future as well. So we want to meet the kids where they are. Kids learn in different ways and have different issues, but we want to just make sure our public school system meets those kids where they are. Further in the session, I'll be continuing to work on a coastal barrier. I represent Houston area, Galveston, Brazoria, and Harris County. And we have ports here, Port of Houston, Galveston, Texas City, Freeport, and even over towards Beaumont. We're working on a barrier, coastal storm surge protection from hurricanes to protect this now the largest petrochemical complex in the world from storm surges. And we've made some progress last session. The federal government did give us about $4 billion that we matched what we needed to do for that to get that project continuing on. And this year, this session, we'll be finalizing a local sponsor to take on that project. So when the feds finish up their final plan, which will be early spring of next year, maybe May, we should be getting to work to go sell that in Congress, but we've got to have a local sponsor that's ready to take on that project. Obviously, education will still be working on connectivity and those kind of things, but it's going to be a very busy session. But what is session going to look like? It's going to be different. Now, I say every session has its own personality, its own surprises. There's things that come up you never dream of. There's never been a boring session that I've been at, and this certainly is not going to be boring. It's going to be very different. We're not allowed to take up and consider legislation before the first 60 days is up. I think that comes from way back, I guess, when guys were coming in on horseback and everything else. But the House generally takes a while to get organized, and now they're going to have a new speaker. So that speaker names every chairman, every committee member, and so that takes a while. But on the Senate side, we're only going to have 3 committees meeting in the first 60 days, which is unusual. The Finance Committee, we go through every agency, and this session will be starting off according to our chairman, like a zero-based budget. We'll start off from square one with each agency. That'll go on for probably 4 weeks, 4 days a week, all day, going through those agencies. And if we don't have it done in 4 days of that week, we'll go 5. So that first month for the finance will be meeting. The other meetings that will be happening was redistricting. Now, redistricting normally would be going around the state, having hearings in different regions of the state. The members of that committee will actually be in the Capitol, but they'll have virtual hearings regionally across the state. So that'll be happening. And Sunset may have a couple hearings or something in there, but that's really it for the first 60 days. With the vaccine coming on, hopefully it looks better than that. But we will have testimony, for finance, and you will be tested before you go in the Capitol. The Senate chairmen are going to be required to post their meeting agendas 72 hours in advance, and people can register online that they want to come, and up to 24 hours before, and then there people can still show up on the last day of. But here's the deal: if you pre-register, it's kind of like TSA pre-check at the airport. There's going to be a shorter line to get your test, and they'll know. And it also helps us know how many people need to be there to help administer the test, as far as giving the testing. So that's kind of a way of monitoring by how many people pre-register. So hopefully that, we'll have like 3 tents. We're going to have one entrance open in the public. That's the north entrance of the Capitol. During the session, we're going to start off with temporary rules and hopefully adjust those as we get later in the session, as we see how the coronavirus is going at that point. But the plans are now to have, like in the Senate, if you watch a Senate hearing, we normally have staff sit behind us. They will not be sitting behind us. We have plexiglass screens between each member. The staff will be sitting in the audience in the portion where the audience normally sits, and then we'll have an overflow room. So that means another committee hearing room. So every committee will have basically occupy at least 2 rooms, which obviously will require that we have fewer committee hearings because the space requirements. So you're going to see, you may see the same number of bills filed this session, but you won't see the same number of bills get through the process. One, because it's a budget session. Two, because the COVID and the space requirements. And I left out the third one, which is redistricting. We're at the end of the decade and it's now time to do redistricting. Of course, that's also been affected by COVID, like what hasn't? But we haven't gotten the census numbers yet. And there's still question about when we get those census numbers. We're required to draw state house, state senate, as well as congressional districts. If we get the numbers during session, we have to have the state house and the state senate done during session. Or my understanding is it goes to the legislative redistricting board. Even if we get it in the last week, we don't have time to do it. It's going to go to the LRD. That's made up of 5 different statewide elected officials. I think we would prefer to draw our own lines and not leave it to 5. But the congressional seats, we will come back in special session. I fully expect to be in Austin for part of next summer, working on at least the congressional redistricting maps and maybe some things we didn't get done during the regular session. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at. These are challenging times, but I say this all the time. I would rather be nowhere else but Texas during a time like this. It's just in our blood. This is what we do. Whether it's hurricanes, down oil prices, taking on other countries to become our own country. It's just in our nature. And we're a state filled with amazing people we call Texans. And that includes people, whether you were born here or you moved here. The people here we just figure out what we got to do to get through it. And that's what we're going to do with COVID. And I expect us to continue to be that bright, shining star once we get through this.
Well, thank you, Senator, for a great overview. It sounds like definitely the puzzle of what session's going to look like is coming together piece by piece, literally. And I know it's going to be different for the Senate than the House. In some cases, just sheer numbers, right? Senate has quite less bodies to manage. And so I know that the House is going to have to maybe be a little bit more creative, especially with being on the floor. So
I think they're going to be putting people in the gallery, actually.
right. Yeah.
Based on seniority.
Right. So it should be interesting. I think it gives, I think, the ability to just focus on the budget in the beginning and kind of limit all of the public attendance, right, as much as possible, will help give time for things like the vaccine and all of that to just develop more. So I think that's very smart. And it gives the House time to, you said there's a new speaker, and they really have to kind of get their rules in order and committee assignments and all of that. So it does provide some breathing space for everybody. One of the things that you mentioned was, obviously when you look at the budget kind of starting from scratch, and we know that that's easier said than done, right? Sometimes because there are so many things that are obligated in the budget or that are quote unquote committed. One of which is transportation funding, right? We know that that's a huge piece. And there was some kind of rumors circling at one point that, everything's on the table, including transportation funding. It's a huge fund. So from your vantage point, what do you think is the appetite for looking at cuts in transportation? Do you think that that's something that is not going to be well received, or do you think there's an opportunity for that?
I don't think anyone is specifically. I haven't heard anyone bring up transportation particularly. Like I said, we still don't know what the number is.
Right.
That number is going to be determined and given to us in the first part of the session by the comptroller. And there's several things that can happen between now and then. The federal government can do another program. The economy can continue to improve to give the comptroller the confidence that our economy is going to do much better and give us a better revenue estimate, which allows us more money to spend. I have every confidence we're going to have a much better revenue picture towards the end of this next budget than we have at the beginning. And hopefully he can take that into account. COVID's not going to last forever. I mean, I hear people talking like that, but I think the vaccine is going to go a long way towards that. Herd immunity is going to go a long way towards that. So I have great confidence we're going to end up looking better at the end of the budget. Now we realize this budget doesn't start till September of 21. We have a revenue estimate we're going to get in January, and they can kind of change it up a little bit as we go through session. but we also adopted, our spending limit. And we adopted a fairly aggressive, which will help us at the end of the budget cycle, that we won't be violating a spending limit. Because I fully anticipate that our economy is going to be doing much better in a couple of years.
Right. Yeah. I know our chairman, Mustafa Tamiz, is on and likes to talk about kind of the investment of transportation and kind of what that means for the economy. So I'm going to tip it to him for a second with
Okay. And, I,
Mustafa.
and like I said, I'd love to hear y'all's take on what you think with COVID transportation and
Okay.
how that's affected things, and what do you see for the future for that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, sir, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for everything that you do in education. I think that last session, your leadership and many others were so important to the state. Um, One thing I wanted just to address that you started to talk about as we look at the next biennial budget, we're all hoping the revenue is going to be more than we expect, but it's still going to be less than what it has been in the past, right? And so there are times where people will come to you and say, can we push off certain projects that were earmarked for 2021 into 2022? And a lot of the bigger transportation projects may come up in that type of scrutiny or look. And the thing we want you to kind of keep in your mind as you talk to your colleagues is that every dollar that gets invested in transportation, you get $3 to $6 in economic activity. And that's just across the board. We've all learned that from various studies and just our own experiences. So if transportation dollars get moved because just to balance the budget, we think that could be detrimental in bringing back the economy sooner rather than later. Because while we're into COVID, the one thing that we can get done faster and better is busy transportation projects, right? People are off the roads, we can get a lot of stuff. So one, we wanted you to keep that in mind. And then two, as a question, can you educate our group, because we were talking about this before you got on, a little bit about after the census data comes in, the redistricting happens, it's the first time where the senators are all on the ballot at the same time, right? That process, and then how did the 4-year, 6-year terms get set up? Because it's something that we don't talk about it often, so not a lot of people know about that.
Well, it is confusing, but we actually draw for 2-year and 4-year terms. After this election, we'll all draw, and some of us will get 2-year and some will get 4-year. That's what happened when I first came in 2013. And I'm still trying to figure out why exactly it was in 13 we did it then, but this time it's going to be in 21. It's a little confusing on that, but I just ran, my understanding is I just ran for a 2-year term because I drew a 4-year at the beginning.
Right. So in essence, like everybody's on the ballot in 2022, but beyond 2022, that's when the coin toss or whatever is going to happen in terms of that, right? But it's a unique thing where all the senators are on the ballot in one election cycle. And that, trying to explain that to people, I was like, it just didn't make any sense how, but every 10 years we go through this.
Yeah, that's right. So 2022, we're all on the ballot, and then we draw straws. We'll draw straws this time to see who's going to be on there for 2 and who's going to be on there for 4.
That's a heck of a straw poll, right?
Yeah. Well, there's some advantages to both. One, you just ran, and so it's still fresh. The other advantage is the disadvantage is you just ran. You don't want to do it again. Some people enjoy campaigning. That's not me. I enjoy the job, and I mean, I say I enjoy it. There's parts of it more enjoyable than others. I'm very gratified with the job, and I enjoy the satisfaction of being able to get things done. But campaigning is obviously I say not obviously, but for me, it's my least favorite part. There's extra stressors, about, you wake up in the middle of the night, think I need to get this done, get that done. And frankly, with what we've been dealing with COVID, I was running a campaign while I was doing the job that I already had been elected to do. And it was in a very intense time. So it was kind of a double whammy. I'm very fortunate that my district is fairly friendly, but like I say, in this last cycle, you have no idea. So you don't take anything for granted in a campaign. And you always want to run like you're behind and make sure you get all those bases covered and do everything you can. What you don't want to do is wake up the morning after and go, man, I wish I'd have done that or done this. And that's something I wouldn't want to live with. So we work hard. Unfortunately, we spend a lot of money, but we're successful. But I just wouldn't want to take that for granted. It's a strange process.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andrea. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good reminder. I had heard that, but I forgot about the drawing. So just interesting.
I think
Interesting.
it was actually beans. We drew beans.
Nice.
There's a little
It was
history in that too.
Very good. Very good. Um, want to kind of go back and talk about the investment in transportation. Um, it is an unusual session, right? We say that every session, but it truly is going to be unusual. And so choose wisely what you're putting forward. In some respects, in other respects, people say everything's on the table. So when we're looking at transportation, one of the things that's come up is alternatively fueled vehicles, electric vehicles, hybrids that are, using the infrastructure but not paying into the gas tax, which is a huge contributor to the highway fund. It's not necessarily it would be, guess, considered a new fee, right? It's not really an increase in taxes, but it's just ensuring that everyone's paying their fair share. So, can you share your thoughts on looking at legislation that would, in fact, make that a more equitable investment for all users of the roads?
Well, the electric vehicle is an interesting issue. We've talked about this for a while because it's obviously not fair. They are using the roads, and but the chances of that passing this session, I'll just tell you, are probably pretty slim. You can call it a fee, but people are going to call it a tax. And
I'm trying to.
yeah, I know. I know where you're going. So there's a couple ideas on that. One, I think they do have to pay something. You can't, particularly as that percentage of vehicles keeps going up. I don't know what the exact percentage is today, but obviously as that threshold gets higher and higher, we're already losing revenues on the fuel tax because vehicles are getting more efficient. We've known that for a period of time. And then as people completely get off of fossil fuels completely, we're losing that. So there's going to have to be some kind of fee that they pay that's the equivalent or something. But I've got several ideas on that. One, you could say once electric vehicles get to this threshold percentage, then this fee kicks in. So it wouldn't be this session kicking in, but it would be in future. We'll probably still take somewhat of a beating over that. But you have to do the right thing at the right time, and we can't continue down this path with no way to fund future highway construction and maintenance. We can't keep cutting off the supply of revenues and keep promoting other types of transportation and not having a way to continue paying for the roads they're using. So I just don't think that's going to happen this session, but I certainly, and I even got something in the mail from the alternative fuel people talking about, they get it.
Right.
They're suggesting that there be like an annual fee that's added to electric vehicles that's equivalent like the average of what people pay in gases for gasoline and diesel. But even then you kind of wonder, well, of course, right now the electric vehicle tends to be more expensive, and you only have the wealthier people driving those. They could probably afford to pay an annual fee, but as they become less and less expensive and easier to buy, you're going to have more people with more moderate incomes buying. They probably can't pay a one-time annual fee of what they would have paid in gas taxes over a whole year spread out every time they filled up. So we'll have to come up with some kind of arrangements for that. But that, it all gets so complicated. But we are going to have to do something. We have to keep up our transportation. You're right. It's a lifeblood. It literally is the life. It's what moves the lifeblood around the state. We know that for a fact. If it gets stopped up here and there, we have economic issues. I know this from the petrochemical complexes in my area with competing with shipping to other ports. If they can get the stuff here, then they can't get it out of the port. They go somewhere else because when you're shipping things, time is money. And so we have to make sure we keep that where that traffic is moving and our commerce continues moving. And we're going to continue to compete with these other ports and frankly, other countries.
Right. And talking about, the gas tax and looking at kind of the equity conversation, you mentioned too the effects of COVID, right? And one of them has been, quite frankly, on the price of gas. It's gone down, and that's not great in many ways, and also helpful in some other ways for those that, are on a fixed income. And looking at the gas tax, there's the conversation comes up every session, right? Whether we increase it or we index it. Obviously, I don't hear any conversation truly about increasing it right now, but the indexing still seems to be a little bit of alive, right? That conversation still seems to be alive. And at a time when gas prices are lower, and so the impact perhaps would feel less cumbersome on those that would have to be paying into it on a regular basis. So can you share your thoughts on indexing the gas tax, and if you think that that's part of any conversation, on the Senate side?
My answer is going to be very similar to the one on electric vehicles. Probably not this session,
Okay.
but yes, it does need to be looked at. But like I said, the fuel economy alone is getting better and better. So even though the purchasing price, the purchasing ability of each dollar is less than it was back in the 90s when they did the last update, uh, purchasing power is down, the fuel efficiency is up, so that revenue source is doing less and less. But we have, we have done some investments beyond that with Props 1 and Prop 7 to
Right.
try to make up for some of those shortfalls. So it's not like you could say we've neglected it for a while, but I think we made great strides in making up for that. In fact, when I travel around the state, everywhere I go, there's construction going on, which is to me,
Right.
that's a good sign that we're preparing for continued growth in this state. And some of it's maintenance, but a lot of it's expansion. So it's not like we've neglected that. That conversation definitely needs to be had. And
Mhm.
we may eventually get to where our cars are getting ridiculous amounts of mileage per gallon, or if we actually got off to something else. But part of your other issue that you brought up, the fact that gas prices are down,
Right.
hurts the state. That's a big source of our revenues when people quit drilling because gas prices are so low. Now that wasn't all COVID. That wasn't all just demand driven. That was a little price war with
Right.
Russia and Saudi Arabia kicking into supply at the same time the demand was going in the tank. So we got a little double whammy there. But yeah, those are conversations and those are realistic and they need to be done. But I don't think you're going to see that this time around.
Well, my hope, certainly pre-COVID, even, I know Chairman Nichols was talking about it quite extensively. And um, I think, on one hand, it is a conversation to say it would be something gradual that we would bring on. Um, but by the same token, I know others would say we look down the road 10 years and say that was revenue that we could have been collecting um, as the amount of people that have those cars are on the road. So, um, but with COVID, it definitely puts a different lens on everything. Um, I also want to ask, kind of talking about the gas tax, conversations we've had with Vice Chairman Transportation, Senator Hancock, his view was the gas tax is kind of, we need to re-examine that as a whole, right? It's just kind of the funding source for transportation, where others really feel that Texas especially will truly still benefit from collecting via the gas tax for a long time, that we will not be as reliant on electric vehicles as some other states or others, other areas believe that we would be. So thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with that. I think we'll be among the last, to be honest with you. I mean, we are a huge oil producing state. And, this idea of zero emissions and all that, that's beneficial, but it's not totally accurate that you're going to get there. I mean, some of these alternative things they're talking about have a lot of emissions. They're just not from the final source. Their emissions are happening as they're producing these things. And like I've already said, we've gotten more diversified than we used to be, but oil and gas is still a big part of this state, and we're not going to artificially cut that off to meet somebody else's goal of something that we have cleaned our air and water up in Texas significantly. We've done it in a reasonable way at the same time we've been growing as a state. Unfortunately, you look at states like California have taken the opposite approach. They're trying to get ahead of themselves and the technology that actually even exists. And they're talking about now going to no internal combustion engines in a certain amount of time. Well, we're not there yet. And articles like that, you're hurting your economy, which is why people like HP and Elon Musk and those guys are moving here. It's going crazy. They're having rolling blackouts in the 21st century. And that's why some of these companies are bailing, because that stuff doesn't make sense. So no, you're right. We're going to have it a lot longer than maybe some others, but we've got such a great supply of it. They used to be talking about we were going to run out of oil in a certain amount of time. They was concerned about that. We found so much oil and gas with fracking that that's not our problem. And I say this all the time. We didn't get out of the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. We got out of the Stone Age, we came up with better technologies. And that's what we'll do with oil and gas. When it's something better comes along, we
Mhm.
can do that kind of thing, but we're not going to do it artificially. And when it's there and it's a ready supply and it's inexpensively priced, we talk about these developing countries. One of the things they need is reliable and low cost. And some of these, grandiose emission plans that people are coming up with are neither.
Right.
And you're keeping people from ever having the ability to develop into countries like we have and we enjoy being a part of here in the United States.
Right. So I know we talked a little bit before about T. Wayne being on, and he does have a question for you. So
Do I get to see him?
you do, in all his glory.
How are you doing, sir? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. There you are.
All right, good. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 11:40.
Oh, what are we doing tomorrow? I looked at my calendar. Oh, in San Antonio. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, quick question. I've been hearing a lot of rumblings from some of the private industry, Ross Perot Jr., Macquarie, those guys talking about the fiasco of I-35 for that 40-mile section and up there in Austin. That, you know, TxDOT obviously doesn't have enough money to fix that section, but they're looking at trying to get private equity to come in and do it 3P on that section. Do you think there's any chance that the lieutenant governor and the governor would be have the appetite for letting private equity come in and help improve our transportation needs up in the Austin area?
Yeah, I really haven't heard from that perspective. I've heard about the disaster in Austin, but it's more than just transportation. I'm sorry. That section of I-35 is a mess. But me personally, if you ask my opinion, I mean, whatever we could do to get that done, if that's what it takes. I know we've had some great examples of three triple Ps getting stuff done.
Yeah.
And if that's an alternative, toll roads came along as a way to fill in some of these gaps at some point. That project along in I-35 just sucks up so much of the money that's using the whole rest of the state. What was the final tag on that? They're talking about like how many billions?
3.5, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
I would say maybe even more than that.
I think that's the part that needs finding. I think it's more than that. I think that's the part that they're
I
looking.
thought it was like 6.
Yeah.
That's what I heard.
3.5 is what needs financed. And the only way that it could get an appetite is if it had a toll component. And the only way that we could do that now is legislation would have to change to allow for TxDOT to do 3P or 3 triple P and to put a tolling component on it.
And the people of Austin will fight that.
Yeah, exactly.
But these are the same people in Austin who allow, they have 3 lanes going both ways on Congress. They just took 1 lane and made it into a bicycle lane. So, I mean, it doesn't have to make sense in Austin. In fact, I was there. If you've been to Austin recently, it looks like a ghost town, except for the tent camping that's going on everywhere. But I'm going down Congress on now the 2 lanes. Of course, there's not a lot of traffic right now, but there was a guy riding his bicycle down the sidewalk. We've got a whole lane of traffic and he's still riding his bike down the sidewalk. So I can't explain Austin to you.
Yeah, Austin's been scary to walk around even just as a pedestrian. I mean,
well, that's why you see the governor talking about, increasing the capital zone to include more of downtown Austin, and he explained it very well. If you think of our capital, that's the front door to our state. When people come to your house, their first impression is your front door, right?
Right.
And so we have companies coming here to, talk about moving their companies here, and that's our front door. And right now, Austin is not a very pretty front door, and it's not safe. And we're going to have a legislative session. You're going to have people come from all over the state of Texas, and they're going to be accosted by some of these homeless people are not friendly, and they're really attacking people, making people very nervous, and Austin once again defunding the police for $150 million doesn't make people feel any safer. And frankly, if I'm an Austin a PD officer, I'm not sure why I still want to stay there with no support from the prosecutors, the DAs, or any of the county commissioners in the city. But it is our capital. All of Texas shares that capital, and they all want to be able to come there safely. So I support the governor in that effort to make a larger capital zone that we can make sure that we have some security around that capital and the people are coming to see it.
And what that does, if am I correct in saying that DPS would then use law enforcement in that capital zone instead of Austin PD?
Yes, but here's the key to that. We're not going to use statewide tax dollars to pay for it. We're going to use Austin's tax dollars to pay for it.
Oh, okay. Wow.
They're going to fund it, but we're going to provide the law enforcement, because it's not fair for all of us to pay for their law enforcement while they go spend their money on all these other projects. So, we may look at what kind of grants they're given from the state as well. While they're spending their money on all these other projects, other than law enforcement, maybe you don't need any state grants.
Wow, good deal. Good deal. Well, thank you very much for everything you do, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
All right, look forward to seeing you too, Wayne.
Yes, sir.
So that kind of brings me to the safety conversation with transportation too. What, you, again, kind of one of the impacts of COVID, right? A lot of people, especially at the peak, out of their cars on bikes and trails more, right? And kind of a renewed appreciation for some of our bikeways and our trailways, especially in Houston. And kind of a resurgence of conversation related to safety issues for transportation, since we saw that even though there were less cars on the road, the fatalities were still pretty high. And we did not see that day that we've been waiting for since 2000, where we haven't had a fatality on Texas roads. So there's been a huge effort, and I know T. Wayne also has been really involved with it at the local level, certainly, but at the state level as well, for Vision Zero efforts. And I know that there's been legislation that's already been introduced all across the board, covering a lot of different safety issues. Can you share from your vantage point how you see the safety conversation playing out this session, primarily on the Senate side, as we look forward?
I don't really have any insights to share that you guys probably know more about that than I do. You bring up the zero fatalities statewide. Boy, our best opportunity had to have been during COVID, I would imagine. I don't know what the lowest day was, but that, I know we're designing our highways to get more of that. I think in some cases less traffic meant faster speeds, which may have accounted for some of that fatalities even happening with less traffic. But I don't really, Andrea, I don't really have any insights for you on that. I'm sorry.
Well, no, and I think some of the issues too are so specific as to speed limits, right? In kind of residential urban areas, that's been legislation. I don't know if it's hit the Senate side yet for this session, but I know on the House side, there's been a few bills introduced related to that, because it just makes it easier for municipalities to enforce lower speed limits if there's state enabling legislation. I know there's some controversy with that, but it is often the difference between a fatality and an injury. So, as those come across your desk, I think it's just kind of an extra look at those. And I know our Houston Public Works is particularly supportive of that, because it's just cumbersome on the municipalities that can put up the signs that have a lower speed limit, but the enforceability is not as easy because the state enabling legislation isn't there. And it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the general picture of it. So
well, I just have to tell you, on pre-filed bills, I haven't seen any of them.
okay.
I'm so busy getting ready to go to session. I don't pre-file bills myself. I've never have.
Right.
When we get there, I'll talk about that first 6 days, and I'll be on the finance committee meeting, but we have time to go through some of those bills. But generally, you will have 7,000 or 8,000 bills filed. So I don't really get too concerned about, a lot of those bills are filed for PR purposes or get attention. It doesn't help your chances one way or the other to pre-file, in my personal experience. So a lot of those, we have to wait how many of them get through the process. And I can just tell you, this session, as we described earlier, there's going to be fewer of them getting to the process and actually getting to the floor, because the committee just won't be able to hear them all.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And we've been told repeatedly, kind of choose wisely is kind of the motto.
Volume's not going to help you this time.
Right. I do want to a few comments, accolades for you in the chat box. So I don't know, Lars, are you still on with LAN? If you wanted to comment, please go for it. Otherwise, I can read your.
Sure. Yep, I'm here. Good afternoon, everybody. I just was taking note, Senator, that the U.S. Congress passed the 2020 Water Resource Development Act. So within that bill that hasn't been enacted by the president yet, one of the 46 studies authorized is the Houston Ship Channel Expansion and Channel Improvement Project. So critical transportation project that should be authorized here in the near future for our region. And then just, you mentioned the local sponsor for the Coastal Texas study, and truly appreciate your support on that. I'm not sure if everyone is aware how critical that is. Without designating that non-federal sponsor, that local sponsor for the construction operations, Congress won't be able to approve that coastal barrier that the GLO and the Corps are working on. So appreciate your leadership in protecting this region against future storm surge.
Well, it's one of my high priorities. Obviously, I'm chairman of education. That's my number one. But As far as legacy type things that are going to last beyond our generation, you look back like the Galveston seawall. It was put up after the 1900 storm, and it's still doing its job today, well over 100 years later. And that's what we're looking at with this coastal barrier. It's going to be providing security and protecting the future of Texas and our economy for many, many years to come. It's just very important. It's been a long-term project. I wish it hadn't taken this long, but it is what it is. You know, we had our hurricane in 2008, and we were unfortunately lost all coverage from the national media because of financial collapse. So we were kind of the forgotten storm, but that was a very near miss of wiping out, you know, that petrochemical complex we're so happy to have. We've had some close calls since then, including Laura that went to Louisiana just this past summer. And, you know, the idea that you can have numerous storms within one summer, I think Louisiana has proved that again this summer. And a few years before that, it was Florida getting like 5 in 1 year. So we've got to build something that can stand up to multiple hits and keep providing that protection, protect this commerce and our national security with what all's produced down there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that national security is one of the main reasons why Annex and Barker dams were approved and constructed to prevent the Port of Houston from being flooded and not being able to produce the petrochemical we needed during World War II. So
yeah, I think Harvey was closed. The Houston port region was closed for about 4 or 5 days, and gas prices went up significantly on the East Coast. I mean, immediately. So imagine if that port was closed for 6 months or a year. And it's, you know, like 60 to 80% of the nation's military aviation fuel is produced in this region as well, and between Port Arthur and us. This is national security as well as our national economies at stake. So we need to get this thing done. So we've made great progress. We're going to have the plan hopefully by the early part of next year, and then we got to go sell it in Congress. And we've got a lot of people helping us. The Chemistry Association is going to help, you know, because all the products we make here go somewhere else. And as well as the products we make here come from somewhere else. So all those other regions are affected in the same way. If we're shut down, we're not bringing in supplies, we're not shipping them out. So it's going to shut down more than just our region. So we have a lot of people I think going to help sell this thing across the country.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership. That's a great segue. I know we've got Bruce Mann on from the port, from Port Houston. Bruce, did you want to?
Yeah, no, great. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Taylor. And I agree with everything that you and the Colonel just said. So I just wanted to say we thank you for your support and appreciate everything that you've done along the way to really helping us be the #1 tonnage port in the U.S. And not only are we #1, but we're twice the size of #3. So, it's been phenomenal growth and you've helped us along the way. So I just wanted to say thanks for all you do on behalf of the port.
You're very welcome. Like I say, it's an honor to be in a position to be able to help on things like this.
Thanks, Bruce. Liz with Representative Thompson's office, I know she was on and wanted to talk about kind of the education committee work. So
anybody but Liz? Anybody? No.
Liz, are you still on with us?
I'm here. I just want to express my gratitude for Senator Taylor working so hard on the Education Committee and ensuring that we have an educated workforce because we need that moving Texas forward. We understand that we have over 1,000 folks moving into Texas, and they're bringing, I think Representative Thompson has been quoted saying they're bringing their cars for our roads, their trash for our landfills, and they're bringing their kids for our public schools. So thank you for all your hard work, sir.
Well, thank you, Liz. And Liz does a great job for Representative Thompson as well. And he's the kind of guy, one of the ones I lean on transportation issues, because that's really where he spends a lot of time. Of course, Senator Nichols and I are very close as well. So what you learn in the legislature is you can't do everything. You can't even know everything. So you find people that you agree with philosophically, and then they go work in those areas while you're working in another area. Then you kind of come together when the time comes that they lean on you for what area you're working in, and you lean on them for what they do. And so Representative Thompson is certainly one of those people who does a lot for transportation in our area and leads on a lot of that, particularly within his district and right around his district. So it's great having a partner like him to work with on this.
Thanks, Liz. I want to talk kind of as we close or get closer to the end of our conversation. From your lens, the working relationship between the House and the Senate and the governor's office as you move towards session, and how much kind of in harmony you think that will or will not be, if the tea leaves have even showed that quite yet. So.
Well, I think the tea leaves are very optimistic at this point. I've never looked at tea leaves, but if they were, I think they would all be pointing in a similar direction. We actually had a good session last session. We all came together, particularly on the education issue, and I think on several others. Whether it was statewide flood planning and that type of thing. So there was a number of issues. We had some real breakthroughs, and what I see from the incoming speaker, they're already having good conversations. And I think he'll do a good job of that as well. I mean, the bottom line is we need to do what's right for the people of Texas and get off of some of these whatever squabbles there are. And people think it's partisan. It's not always partisan in Texas. In fact, we have rural versus urban, suburban. I mean, there's just all kind of things going on. There's a lot of different ways you can divide people with. But the bottom line is, I feel very confident. I talk about it all the time. Our legislature does a great job bringing a very diverse group of people together, but we have real conversations and we can have real debates. We don't have to agree on everything, but if you disagree in an agreeable way, you can still find a solution together. In fact, we've had some real good debates, but then we go out to dinner together. And it's unfortunate that they can't have that kind of thing going on in DC where they can actually, there's value in listening to people of diverse opinions. You end up with a better decision at the end of the day than having one side just roll over at one group. So I learned early on in my legislative career, it's just important to listen because you don't know what you don't know. And I grew up in one part of the state, and I think of public schools from my own personal experience. And then I'll find out there's a whole bunch of other areas out there that have had different experience in that. And you really need to listen to those people. Otherwise, you can make some really bad decisions when you try to make a statewide law.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And it's also why in these conversations I've asked, as we talked before we started today, to please talk about things other than transportation, because we don't want to just be in a silo where that's all we're thinking about, because it's just not helpful, when we're trying to look at the whole view of session and what it's going to bring, and kind of going back to the budget, because of COVID, or even just, COVID reframed a lot of things for a lot of people personally, professionally. What do you think, on the budget and kind of priorities? Has anything shifted because of COVID? And I know we talked about broadband and education, but other than that, is there anything else you can think of where, okay, gosh, maybe, last session, we wouldn't have even been considering this as much, but now we are because of COVID?
Well, I just say overall, the emergency powers that we've been living under now for how many months? Normally emergency powers are for like short-term things like hurricanes, tornadoes, some kind of natural disaster, or even fires. We've had fires, but those are for short-term. You suspend certain things for a short period of time to get so it's more efficient and get things going again. But it was never anticipated to go for something that's gone on for this many months, and we don't know how long it's going to continue. So I think we need to look to the future of how we're going to handle future incidents like this. The important thing is when you do have something like this, as challenging as it is, you should learn from it and then write it down. So the next group who faces the same thing, because I talked about this when we worked on our hurricane plans. I've now been through several hurricanes, and if they happen every 6 or 8 years, there's been enough turnover between those hurricanes that you get a new crew that doesn't really know exactly what to do. So we made efforts to, let's put this down in writing. So the next time it happens, it's not like, what do we do? What do we do? They've already got a little playbook to go by. And I think for the pandemic, we're going to have to come up we had some discussion in our Senate Republican caucus about thresholds. When do we go from emergency powers to having to have some kind of confirmation from the House and the Senate, or even a smaller working group or something to have more input on what goes on these kind of decisions. Like I say, no one anticipated this, and it's been a real shock, and we've had to all adapt to it, our schools particularly, but so have our companies, our employers. And this has been quite a strain on everybody, but hopefully at the end of the day, we'll learn things from this, things that are positive that we can use from this point forward. And then obviously we're learning things we don't want to ever do again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And your thoughts on, the local versus state control conversations are always threaded through a lot of different issues during session. I think COVID certainly put an extra magnifying glass on some of those tensions. I think is safe word to say. How do you think that's going to play out in session?
Well, I can just tell you as a former city council member, I think we've had some local control issues that I think we may have gone a little too far in the legislature that I wasn't necessarily supportive of. I think you need to be careful with that because the government really is best when it's done as close as to home as possible, particularly where the taxes are raised to pay for that. It's spent more efficiently the closer it is to home. Times we've had some municipalities and some counties go beyond, and start violating the constitutional rights of the people within their jurisdiction. At that point, we have to step in. And we've done that. The unfortunate part of that, I tell people all the time about probably about half the laws we pass is because somebody wasn't acting right. And it's hard to go fix that one without messing up a bunch of other people beside them that weren't doing anything wrong. So that's really probably one of the tougher jobs we have is how do you tailor that to just where you're trying to fix the malfeasance without causing problems for everybody else around them. And I think that in some cases has gone over the top.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, we talk with our county judges. That's a huge issue. And so I know we're going to be looking out at that quite a bit. And we TAG do support legislation that allows for municipalities to have the flexibility if they choose, right? Not a mandate from the state. If they choose, we've got some counties have the ability to assess the vehicle registration fee to pay for local projects. I know Waller County is a county that has talked about, they've got a mobility plan and, they're looking to fund it and having that flexibility. It's surprising some counties that would you not consider be supportive of that but don't have that ability. And so I think that's something to watch too, as the session unfolds, what types of local versus state control issues, really show up and really influence conversations.
When you said that some municipalities or jurisdictions don't have that, but was it done by legislation that they were allowed to do it, or they just chosen to do it on their own?
So for some, for instance, Bexar County has the ability or has actually created where they have an additional $10 vehicle registration fee, right? I think last session they tried to come back and do it again, but it failed. But not every county has that ability, right? It's not kind of across the board. So you have to go up individually by county or by kind of local, regional support. But I think that part of the reason why they were successful is because they have an RMA. And so it's a direct fund to something that goes to very specific projects, right? So, but it's things like that where I know that some counties and cities, even the sales tax, right, we're capped, right? So, but those are hard conversations, and even for local officials, those are hard conversations because those are regressive taxes. But it is the ability to be able to raise the money locally and not have to rely on the state and federal government so much. And that's something that transportation, we're always looking at that because that's just a great way to be able to fund local projects. And voters traditionally are supportive if you're tying it directly to something that they can look at a list, right? And say, I know my money is going to this, this, and this, and this. So that's something that we hope to continue the conversation on, if not this session, obviously, future sessions, because it's always on our minds for looking at ways to fund projects.
Yeah, and that's one of those questions where we get a lot of complaints about local property taxes, beyond the school part,
right?
And that really is up to the local taxpayer. And a lot of times they get frustrated, they want to complain to us, but they voted for the last whatever issue that was brought before them, or they didn't vote at all. In most cases, they didn't vote at all. I mean, our municipal elections, the turnout is pretty low, but then they want to complain about what their city council or what their county commissioners court is doing. If you don't participate in those elections and pay attention, that's local government. If you choose not to be a part of it, shame on you. And where we get involved is, like when one area starts saying we're not going to allow fracking.
Right.
These are things that affect the whole entire state. It's 100-year established law. We can't have an individual, because imagine the commerce around the state. If you have different areas doing different things with pipelines or whatever, you've got to have a consistent policy across different parts of the state. You can't just have a patchwork and have to go around that county and then connect over here. So I'm more supportive of those kind of things that affect commerce, intrastate commerce,
Right.
versus individual cities and county, what they want to do with their tax rate and all that. But I understand the caps, but we do have we've allowed several different things for whether it's economic development or transportation, those kind of things.
Right, right. Well, I know we're rounding out our hour with you, and so I do want to close. I want to say thank you. We look forward to continuing the conversation with whatever session looks like beyond those initial days. We know many advocacy days won't look the same as they have, but we're committed to being somewhat creative, and we'll work with your office to see what we can do. Traditionally, it's the end of February, so that gives us some time. So,
And hopefully things look better at the end of February than they do today in December. So
yeah,
that's my hope. I'm an eternal optimist.
yes, yes, no, and we appreciate your leadership and always willing to have a conversation and a straight shooter. And we wish you the best, and we look forward to, like I said, staying in touch with you. So thank you so much for all.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Y'all have a great day. Merry Christmas to you.
Yeah, same to you. Same to you. And for everybody on, join us next week. We've got presumptive speaker Dade Phelan on Tuesday morning, and we've got Chairman Nichols on Thursday morning. So we've got a busy week. So please make plans to tune in for that. And we thank you all for tuning in today. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, first of all, to TAG for all that you're doing, and thank you for thinking about those families who need.
I hope to see y'all soon. I appreciate your work, your advocacy, not just during the session, but post-session.
You're innovators, visionaries, and I really appreciate that.
Appreciate the friendships that I've had with the transportation community.
Thank y'all for putting these on. It's just a really great idea, and thank you to everyone that's watching.
Definitely thank you to TAG for keeping us connected, continuing to keep us connected even in these unprecedented times.
We're all in this together. We will come out of this together. We will definitely be stronger together.